to the fifth week of the Pacific Division Feeding Series. My name is Yi Wei. I am your host throughout the sessions. I'm having trouble muting myself today for putting myself under Do Not Disturb. I don't seem to be able to do that. So you might hear some background noises from my chat, and I apologize for that. All the sessions will be recorded and the links will be published on YouTube. The last week's session is already on YouTube, but I haven't got the chance to send out the slides yet. We have a very information-packed session again today. We're halfway there. I thank you so much for joining us every single week on Wednesdays. I will go ahead and pass to Mary to share a few words with us and to start the session. Mary?
Thank you. Thank you, Yue. And hi, everyone. It's so good to see a lot of familiar names in the participant guide. I just wanted to quickly share a couple things before Julia Bishop from Cascades will start off this presentation. I want you to remember this is not an official class. What we are doing is sharing both Red Cross practices, procedures, and policies, as well as reality, what it's really like out there, as well as kind of how to do best practices. So it's a little combination of everything. And then, of course, we hope you'll take all this information with you and put it to good use in your region or on your next deployment, wherever that may be. But remembering that you have to be flexible because a lot of times it's a little different in different locations. So again, we're really excited. The slide says feeding process, but this is really an exciting session. It's about how we get our food and how we pay for it. Because you can't just get food, you got to be able to pay for it. So it's an exciting session, and I hope you get a lot out of it. So I'm going to let my partner in crime, Julia Bishop, start us off.
Okay, first off, I have to start off with the fact that a year or so ago, Brad announced that Red Cross would no longer be feeding. And he kind of sent a panic wave through a lot of us Red Crossers thinking, what, we're getting rid of feeding. What he meant is we will no longer be cooking. But if we shelter them, we have to feed them. And we have to feed them in a lot of different ways and areas as well. So I'm glad to see everybody's interested in this and wanting to learn this. So we'll get started right away. If we'll go to the next slide, please. So we supply hope and comfort. Food is always a comfort food. And the one thing I love about feeding people, I love to get a chance to get out in the earth and drive around on them because they're always excited and glad to see you. Next slide. So steady state is the best time to do your blue sky, which is called blue skies work, to find your vendors and make arrangements. You live in that area, you know the best restaurants and the best catering groups and who to contact. Always ask and get that information ahead of time so you've got your foot in the door and you're ready to go. Because we're in a neighborhood of, we don't get a lot of warning that we're going to have a wildfire or a flood happening. So it's always good to know that we've got some folks in our back pocket. We use national vendors, franchises, corporate, family owned restaurants, and caterers. And we always do try to lean on the family, local owned ones because they can't spread the loss and the disaster over other stores. It's just theirs. We also have other options of using jails, prisons, hospitals, Meals on Wheels, colleges, and many others. Next slide. So the biggest thing you have to deal with is the vendor agreement form, which is found in OneSource. And it's always good to read through it carefully before you send an email copy to them and then have them open it up and walk them through it because it can be very confusing. If there's any other questions or concerns or agreements you guys have made on the side, please confirm that in an email so nobody has any question about, well, I thought we said we were going to do this and that. Keep everything in writing and track everything. Have a vendor email back to you, or if it's a local one, when you're on a DR, just go pick up the signed document so you're ready to start. And make sure, like I said, always keep everything in writing and confirm what you're doing. Next slide. So this is the vendor agreement, and it's like 6 or 8 pages long. I know they're revising it to make it more cleaned up and concise. But if we scroll through this a little bit onto page 4 and 5, I believe it is. Yue, can you do that for me? You do need a W-9 copy from the vendor that you're working with. Whoops, where'd you go?
I am showing the link for
Oh,
page
okay.
5
Thank
that
you.
you wanted to show. I already put the link in the chat as well.
Good.
So you said you wanted to go to page
Yeah.
4 or
So
5?
this is all the information about the vendor. Stop right here. Whoops.
Go back.
Yeah, so they can see those little blue squares. So here's where you put the price of the meal, what is in there. We try not to do hot breakfasts except for when we're trying to build morale or on a weekend thing, because we stick with the continental breakfasts, and that's supplied by your fulfillment team or logistics. But this is the things that we request when we ask of them. And sometimes you have to remind your vendors that, like your lunch and dinners, 8 ounces of entree, 6 ounces of vegetables, 6 ounces of fruit, and make sure that they stick with that. And we've had some issues that we've had to go back and make sure that they know and understand that. And then it goes through how we serve and what they do. Ask them if they can deliver or we pick up. Okay, keep sliding up a little more. Keep going, keep going. Anyway, walk through this and know this before you send it to the vendor, and make sure you walk them through. So the next page, going on down, so it'll ask the minimum amount of meals they'll do and the maximum and what times a day. And then you want to make sure you know how many days they need to shut off. When, if all of a sudden you see the disaster winding down, how many days do you need to give them to let them know that they'll be done? Because they go out and buy all their groceries, and you don't want to get them stuck with a bunch of food that they can't use. And keep going down a little further. It'll tell you that we only cater to change meals other than our standard meals for either health reasons or religious reasons. And then we always do make sure we've got our vegetarians and vegans. Keep going down. And here it talks about our equipment, and if we charge, sometimes you can get a better rate with them if you offer to supply the clamshells and the cutlery, and we've got cases of that stuff in our warehouses. If you don't have it available, then you're just going to have to make it added into the cost. Keep going. There's some next little boxes that talks about how we pay payment. There we go. That's what always confuses people. So it says American Red Cross payment terms, 2%, 15, net 45. They're always going, what are you talking about? So anything over 25,000 will be paid in a purchase order, and that can have them not get their payment for another 45 days. So that the small mom and pops could panic on those things. There's ways around that that you'll learn in another class later on. But make sure they know and understand, because when you scroll down further, they have the option to check how they'd like to get paid, and weekly or bi-weekly or monthly, and if they want to get paid by a P card. Well, if it goes over that amount, it automatically goes to the 45 days unless they want to take a 15% discount because they want it payment sooner. So just make sure you're comfortable with this form and you know and understand it. If you don't, there's always people you can call and ask. We all have phone a friends. All these people that are on here in our feeding division are more than willing to walk you through and talk you through that so you can know and understand it before you send this off to your vendor. Okay, we can go to the next slide now.
Julia, wait. Can you scroll all the way up to page 1 of this document for me? And scroll down just a little bit more and go to page 2. I'm sorry. You know, one of the things that I try and do is I complete right there. That's perfect. I complete as much information as I can for the vendor, so it's not overwhelming for them. So I highly recommend that you really take this document as yours and you fill it out until it comes to the part where obviously the vendor has to give you input. And you can even do that over the phone, fill it in for them, and then send it to them.
Yes.
Okay.
But you do need to have a signed copy from them.
Okay, thanks, Iwe. You can click out of that.
Okay, I will do that. Please allow me some time. And in the meantime, I do want to remind you all that a W-9 is needed from the vendor.
Yeah.
Okay, let me do my magic and see how I can stop sharing and reshare. Give me 1 second, please.
Oh, that's fine. It's just that that's the biggest thing that will hiccup you with any kind of concerns or problems with your vendors. We had a wonderful lady in Mississippi that we owed her $40,000, and she was borrowing money from her friends and her church family to keep it going because she didn't know she wasn't going to get paid for 45 days. So she was really grateful when she got her money. So always make sure that they know and understand how that payment's going to get made.
Okay, go ahead, Julia. I'm
Okay,
back
we
to
need to
the
go
slides.
about 4 or 5 slides down. Okay, your 6409 is your friend. A lot of people don't like it. The biggest thing is if you fill it out properly, it's your best friend. If you need help filling it out, ask somebody to fill it out for, or help you walk through. When you're filling it out to request payment or to use a vendor, you want to make sure you put in how many meals per day, and for how long, times whatever money, and put that in that and get that approved by your feeding lead, and then you're good to go. Anybody you can answer any questions at the end. I already kind of went through this part of it already, so you can go to the next slide. So these are some of our national vendors, and I'm sure you've already heard some of them, and there are others. Southern Baptist, sadly, they're my favorites. We have Loaves and Fishes, the Amish Kitchen, Salvation Army, World Central Kitchen, Mercy Chefs, Operation Barbecue. And now there's a lot of other ones that are coming on board as well that realize they like being as part of the disaster and feeding in a disaster. Oh, Kay has a good comment. They can submit a menu, which is always nice. If they let you know what you're feeding, then you can always make sure that there's no problems with the meals. And you also have to be careful about the demographics of your area. So talk with your external relations people to know, do you have, when I was in San Jose, our shelters were mainly Hispanics and Asians. And so we had to make sure we had lots of rice and lots of beans and hot sauce at our meals. We had to buy rice cookers to make sure that we were taking care of the meals that they're used to having. Okay, next slide. So using our national vendors, some of them you have to get permission from. The Southern Baptist Mobile Kitchen, where they bring in a whole mobile kitchen and set up at a Baptist church, has to be approved by national before you can bring them in. There is a difference between them and a Baptist church that has a commercial kitchen. You don't have to get permission for that, but you do want to let your feeding lead know that, because just in case Lauren Meyer from National has a question, it's not a mobile kitchen. And we do have emergency feeding company that we can go through called Firehouse Subs, and they do other things other than subs. But those are some of our national partners that you want to make sure you have permission with national about. And we'll get into food boxes later down the slides. Those you have to get permission from national to purchase the food boxes. Next slide. So feeding options, Cracker Barrel is a great supporter. I've had their district directors call me at 4 o'clock in the morning because they were in Tennessee and said, "We saw you had a tornado. Do you need our help?" Yes, we'll always use the Cracker Barrel, but don't call the store. Call the district catering person. They'll make all the arrangements for you that you need. Heater meals are always a backup plan. It depends on some of the areas you're working in. Sometimes, depending on what your situation is, you may be able to only supply a lunch and don't have enough teams or people to get out if you're doing mobile feeding to do dinners. So you have to request heater meals. So you give them a hot lunch and a heater meal for dinner, but that has to be also approved and be part of the service delivery plan. So you need to make sure you're talking with your mass care people and see what they've approved to let you do that. Food trucks are another fun one to be able to do, especially in the rural areas and there's not a lot of choices. There are service organizations that are always willing. I worked with the Lions in rural Oregon, and they have their chuck wagons, as they call it, that they do at events to fundraise. And they said, "Yeah, we'll come in and serve and feed for you." So that was wonderful. And then when you get into situations where they can go back home, but they have power now, but they're still trying to muck out their houses and do whatever, we'll work with food banks to give them food boxes, or you can buy the food boxes through the Red Cross partner. Be careful of those boxes because a lot of times they're very expensive because they're prepackaged food, and they don't always think that we have the time or the ability. But we found in Mississippi it was much cheaper for us to go to Costco, buy the stuff, and get some EBVs to put together food boxes and hand them out to the clients so they at least feel like we haven't abandoned them. You send them home with them when they leave the shelter, or if they're home and they're trying to muck out their houses, we'll give them food boxes. So that's another option for you. Next slide. Other ways to buy food. Okay. So this part Mary's going to take over on.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, we have all these places we can buy food from, and if we're fortunate and we have filled out the multi-page form, I know, Tom, it's a lot. That's why I fill most of it out for my vendors and get it in. But sometimes we're not going to be able to have that type of a feeding process. So how else are we going to pay for the food? Well, one way that we do that is through a MassCare procurement card. That's a debit card that can be used only when necessary. Let me give you an example. When you first open a shelter, possibly the first meal or two, you may have to buy from the local restaurant or local sandwich shop, and you don't have anyone there that has a P card. The MCPC card could be used to make the purchase of those food. Now, MCPC cards are only $500, so you could go through that pretty quickly. But generally, we use these for really small shelters. It's critical that the expenses are pre-approved. So for example, your feeding lead or your MassCare lead would say, use the MCPC card to buy lunch for the 25 people we have in the shelter until we can get one of our feeding partners, Salvation Army or Southern Baptist or World Central Kitchen there. Next slide.
Can I add something real quickly too, Mary?
Of course.
Do not use an MCPC card to buy snacks. Maybe the first day, but otherwise then it comes to logistics to purchase those for you. That'll eat your card up in no time.
And I do have the best practices down there in the bottom in red. Never give the MCPC card that you've been issued to someone else to make a run because you are responsible. And this slide comes directly from OneSource in terms of what you have to go through and what you are responsible for once you're issued an MCPC card. So you yourself are accountable for all the funds. So if someone goes off and buys inappropriate things, well, a lot of times it'll get caught and it will reject the card, but sometimes things get through and you are responsible for those. There's processes and procedures that are on the OneSource that if you go to the feeding toolkit, you will find easy for you to look at and review in case you're going to be the one carrying the MCPC card. Okay, next slide. So how do you get one? Well, first of all, the 6409, it's your friend. So you would complete the 6409 and give it to your supervisor, either the feeding lead or your MassCare lead or whoever's your direct supervisor, and they would get it processed. Next slide. So one last thing on the MCPC card, you can only re-up it, if you will, recharge it. And I think I have a slide later in that 2 times. So then you would need to get a new one unless your lead already had one in their possession for you. So let's say you do have an MCPC card or something else that's called a purchasing card, or yes, a purchasing card. That's more like a credit card. We're going to talk about that in a couple more slides. But let's just say you're going to be using an MCPC card for a shelter that's less than 30 people. what you want to do is try and anticipate at least a couple days out. And the reason for this is it's going to take one of our main partners a few days, as some of you have heard, 48 hours to 72 hours for them to get there, get their team, get their food, get set up so that they can cook and feed for us. So you're anticipating a couple of days. Best to look for the national chains, Firehouse, Subway, those kinds of things. They can usually handle pretty last minute orders. I've never walked into a Subway and not been able to get 30 sandwiches. Local vendors are good too if you already have working relationships that you've built with them during Blue Skies. And certainly your local supermarkets and delis. For us in California, Northern California, we have two chains called Safeway and Raley's. Those work really, really well. I'm sure you all have supermarkets in your regions that have these nice delis that do both hot and cold foods. Next slide, please. So we've covered this before. We're not going to go over it again. It's what are the special meals? What are the religious meals? The medically dietary necessary meals? But here's what I want you to take a look at. Down at the bottom, these are kinds of meals that are not considered dietary needs. And therefore, it is not expected that you are going to have to come up with a keto diet, keto meal, or an alkaline diet, or the blood type diet, or any of those other ones, the Atkins diet. That's not what our partners can do, and nor do we support all those, we'll call them bad diets at this point. Next slide, please.
Well, to be honest, Barry, we can't always get them to do the vegetarian and the specialty meals, so to go far afield, that's even tougher on them.
Yeah. Honestly, since food is so important in our lives, and like Julia said, when you start, it's really comforting when you're in disaster. We try our best to accommodate those special dietary needs that people have, even when they want. But at some point, you can't do 20 different types of meals even from a local vendor, even from a restaurant. So we stick with the ones that the Red Cross recognizes as either medically, religiously, or culturally needed. And, hopefully we can appease almost anyone with those. It's pretty broad. It's a pretty good selection. One of the things you want to do when you're planning your meals and you're going to be purchasing them on an MCPC card or P card is always confirm in writing, if you can, through an email or a text. That way you've confirmed the numbers that you're going to get, what you're going to be getting, when you're going to be picking it up, and the cost. I'll give you an example. I usually work with Subway down here in Central California, we'll say, and they use a 14-inch tortilla for their wraps. So I was way up in Northern California, way at the border. They use a 12-inch tortilla, and I had ordered wraps for the shelter. Well, I always take them and cut them in half. So then once they fold the ends, you have on a 14-inch, you have about a 6 to 7-inch wrap. Well, when you do that with a smaller one, by the time you wrap it, you end up with like a 4-inch wrap. So that's why it's important to put all of that in writing. As it turned out, it was great because we were really close to the Subway and we went back and got a couple more and everyone had more than they could eat. But there's an example of, we had done that over the phone. I had used Subway before and thought I knew what was going to happen. And in fact, they had a little bit different supply and therefore the wraps were kind of tiny, if you will. Always, always, always take the tax exempt letter from the Red Cross with you. Now, if you're talking about $200 and $300 for some meals, which is just for, maybe 20 people, you want to try and save as much money as we can. Now, a lot of times restaurants don't know how to do that. So if you take the tax exempt letter with you, they will usually be able to fill it out. I know their cash registers always just automatically add the tax the way it is, but usually the manager knows how to do the workaround for that. It's very helpful for us. We are a tax exempt organization. And so those letters are, your region has them. There is actually some from national, but in my region, my region has their own. So I always make sure my feeding leads have those in their feeding boxes, their kitchen boxes. Next
They're
slide,
also on
please.
OneSource.
Thank you, Julia. They're also on OneSource. We'll see if we can find that for you, and if not, we'll get it out to everyone, the link. Next slide. So again, when you want to reload, you're going to have to ask your either your shelter supervisor, your sheltering lead, your HQ lead. You're going to have to ask your supervisor to do it. And remember, you can only do it twice. And it does take a couple days. So if on your first order, if you've done, $250, probably want to start the process of requesting a reload. Remember, the most important thing is take a picture of the receipt. You actually do need the original receipt, but if you have a picture, you always have backup. And when we go to the next slide, if you would, please. So the purchasing card is a little different. The purchasing card's like a credit card. It's a payment card, if you will. And if you're not everyone is issued a P card, but if you are issued one, that's more like having a credit card that you can purchase with. You still need to keep receipts, and I recommend taking photos of everything you buy, as well as keeping the original receipts, because you'll have to do what they call I just lost the word, not a justification, but you have to do,
Reconciliation.
thank you, a reconciliation by the 23rd of each month. Again, these are very complex issues, and there's much more training that can be done with both the MCPC card and the P card through Edge. So if you are a feeding person looking at being a feeding lead, I would strongly recommend you look into that.
You can always
Next.
talk to your local finance person too, and they can help walk you through any concerns you may have on how to make sure that works.
Right. So let's just say that you do have a P card, and they and you're going to do a big, huge order with them. First of all, you need to know that then the purchase needs to be under $10,000 for the goods and services. Even if you have a higher limit on your card, that's the maximum amount. You do have to have a purchase, you have to use your P card if a purchase order is not required. So remember, and again, we're going to cut, there's another session that talks about forms and things that this will be in. If it's going to be $25,000 overall for the purchases of the food, you're going to be using centralized billing. You're going to be using a purchase order. Let me give you an example. When we do Red Cross and we have a known event, and when we use Salvation Army and we have a known event, it's a wildfire and it's going to go on for a week. We know that it's going to be more than $25,000. We are going to do a purchase order for our partner. We're not going to pay them with a P card. Okay, the P card is for when you don't have a feeding partner or someone who, like some Southern Baptist, that is cooking for you. So it's like if you have to go to your local restaurant, your Black Bear Diner, your Denny's, and pick up meals for the people in your shelter.
Okay, Mary,
Next.
can I interject something too? Most everybody's card, they've dropped all the limits down to where some of them are only $250 or $500. The minute you get on a DR, if you know you're going to be doing this, you have to apply to have the limit of your card raised. When they raise that limit, they'll tell you what they'll limit you, but it's also per purchase. So if you are limited to $500 per purchase and your meal comes to $600 and some dollars, it's not going to pay for it. So you'll either have to put it in two charges or make sure that your per purchase dollar amount is raised and the full card amount is raised.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, next slide. We have about 5 minutes. So what do you do at the end of the assignment? Well, first of all, don't leave either your P card or your MCP card with another volunteer or your supervisor or, well, yeah, eventually your supervisor, because you have to complete the disaster requisition form, the 6409, for each of the purchases that you made. So if you bought meals for 5 days, you need 5, unless it's from the same vendor, you need 5 6409s and 5 receipts to go along with that. Those have to be turned in to either the feeding lead or the mass care lead or the logistics lead before you leave.
With the card and your expense form.
So there's the 6409, there's the expense form, there's the receipt, and the card itself. Now, I know people have been told to just take their card and cut it up when they get home, but that's not what actually is supposed to happen. So you're better off turning it in, making sure you keep a copy of it, especially if it's on a P card, because you're going to be signing into Morgan Chase Bank and doing a reconciliation at the end of the month, and you'll have to be uploading those receipts. So make sure you either have a picture copy or a paper copy before you leave the DR. And I'll tell you, we're fortunate later in the session, Hillary King from NCCR is going to be talking a lot about the paperwork and the follow-up and the processes, which she'll walk you through that you'll feel much more comfortable than probably you are right now in terms of how we keep track of things. And it's a lot to keep track of. As someone said a couple sessions ago, other than if they're putting a lot of people in hotels, feeding is the most expensive thing that the Red Cross does. So we have to be really careful. We have to track it. It helps us in terms of our fundraising and donations, and we have to be very careful about how we do that. Julia, did you want to add something?
No, just that
Oh.
make sure when you're doing all this, what is put into the service delivery plan. Because if you're planning to do mobile feeding and they haven't added the expense of that and your herbs in there, you will not be able to do mobile feeding. So always know what the parameters they put you in, because like she said, the feeding costs can put you to the next DR level. It can go from a 3 to a 4 very quickly, depending on how many people you're feeding.
Right. Okay, next slide, please. So this is a copy, this is a screenshot of your Mass Care Procurement Card expense register that needs to be turned in at the end. You would be filling that out as you go. It says right here. And this was I'm sorry, this was one I did for another training, a sheltering. It says diapers. As a feeding person, you wouldn't be buying diapers, but you would have the vendor, the name of the items, the purpose, lunch from Subway, whatever the cost. And then that would go with your receipts and your card when you turn everything in. Next slide, please. Yeah, again, all of your purchases must be approved, even if you're getting them approved after the fact. You have certain people have certain amounts that they can approve, so sometimes it has to go up 1 or 2 individuals on the DR, on the disaster relief operation. So when you're using it, it's totally okay to do a purchase via fax or online. So many of our vendors, all of our supermarkets with delis, some of the local sandwich shops, they won't take a credit card over the phone anymore, mostly for security purposes. So it is okay to go online after you've talked to them and say, you're doing an order for tomorrow. Please don't do it right now. And put your order in online or send it via fax. And of course, you can always go in person. Like I said earlier, the P card has to be reconciled. It closes on the 23rd of the month, so you have to go in before then. And again, if you are issued a P card, which I strongly recommend, if you are going to be a feeding supervisor, that you request a P card, even if it has a smaller limit, because you never know when something's going to happen. And maybe, you plan to have 50 people in the shelter, and all of a sudden there was a big wind shift in the fire, and they've evacuated another whole section, and now you have 150 people, and then you would need to go buy extra food. So I just strongly recommend that you have one. It's a bit of a responsibility, but I know you guys can handle it. Next
Mary,
slide.
can we clarify something? Because Hillary made a point in the chat.
Yes.
You just don't say, hey, I'm deploying to so and so, I need a P card. It takes months to apply for that card and get that assigned to you. It's not a quick fix. It's a blue skies thing. So like you said, make sure that if they're going to continue to do this, that they work with their DPM to apply to get a P card, because the region
Excellent.
needs it. I mean, our division, or our region, we try to have somebody in each territory have P cards. So if we have to stand up a shelter rather quickly, that there's somebody in that area that already has a card.
Yeah, and for us, and I would suspect maybe Alaska, also Idaho. I mean, a lot of areas, one P card is probably not enough based on how rural the territory is and how rural people are. So I thank you, Hillary, for bringing that to our attention, and Julie for talking about that. It is a process, and you do need to stay on top of it. But I'm going to tell you, as the Pacific Division feeding lead, we need more feeding supervisors. And as a result, we would love for you to request through your DPM that you carry a P card to better serve our clients. Okay, next slide. I think we're almost done. So again, with the end of the assignment on your P card, you're not turning your P card in. That is your card that's assigned to you forever and ever and ever. It's your credit card. It's a Red Cross credit card. So you keep your receipts or photocopies of your receipts to reconcile your account. Again, no later than this is the last business day of the month, but it's really the 23rd of the month. And next slide. I think, Julia, it's back to you.
So Mary, I do want to clarify, the billing cycle closes on the 23rd. That's
Correct.
the cycle closes. The reconciliation process, you have to finish that by no later than the last business day of the month. So the 23rd is the closing cycle. The last business day is because if you have to finish before 23rd, the charges on the 23rd, you still have to reconcile. So the reconciliation process is by the last business day of the month.
And you may not even have all the charges in. It may take thank you, Yi-Wei, you're absolutely right. That was great clarification. You may have a couple of months depending upon when it falls and when you've made purchases. I personally like to do it as I go along. I like when I get a receipt, it usually takes 2 or 3 days, maybe even 4 days for the charge to hit the credit card. But then I can go into my account, I can put what it is in, fill out all the forms, because there's an accounting string that goes with it. Again, we don't need to go into that kind of detail because I want to leave time for questions, but I like to keep up with it as I go along, so it's not all there at the end. Let's go to the next slide because I want to make sure we have.
Mary, just thing I
yes.
want to clarify. Make sure when you have your P card and you use it on the DR, that the leadership knows that card has been assigned to the DR, because all those charges will go to your region and your DPM will throw you under the bus. Make sure that, and when there's all the coding system, like she says, that you have to put the code for that DR on those charges. So they'll panic if they think they're going to end up having to pay for all that.
That's correct. And again, there is training in Edge on this. So, you won't be given one without further instruction and further training. Trust me. But thank you, Julia. That's very good.
Okay, and our last slide is, so we can have time for questions, is our mission is to alleviate suffering. And thank you for being a volunteer. And like she said, We need leadership. And I know I know a lot of these names on here, and I hope all of you are looking to become either a feeding SV or an MN, because we don't have enough in our division. And I'm also the division DES lead. I'd love to see people cross train, because a lot of times they go from feeding over into DES when that starts to ramp up a little bit more. So it's always a good combination. If you want to know more about DES, please check that out. And I love this little Dr. Seuss quote: to the world, you may be one person, but to the one person, you may be the world. And that's what we try to do in a disaster. And thank you for being a Red Cross volunteer. And thank you for being a part of this training. So now you can ask us all the questions you want, and hopefully we have the answers. If we don't, we'll find out the answers.
Well, and I'd like to just say we also have some other experts on the line. So if we don't know the answers, we may be able to toss it to one of our colleagues.
Thank you so much. I will go ahead and open the floor up to everyone and that you can unmute. I will do that in just a second. And I want to address some of the questions that is already in the chat. Let's see. We have one question that was answered already by, but we still want to put out to everyone in case anyone is doing phone dials. So for the team, for all the expert, if the Red Cross is no longer doing the cooking, will the kitchen management class be changed, or are we going to still to do that course?
I'll take that one because I answered it on chat too. We were talking about just, we don't cook in kitchens. Red Cross doesn't cook in kitchens anymore. We let vendors do it. If you look at, say, the Southern Baptist setting up in a kitchen setting, that's just one small part of a kitchen. So we need that management class. There's, the herb drivers who are going in and out. There's the yard dog and putting food on herbs and sending it out to shelters and taking it out to people. There's so much that happens in a kitchen. The actual cooking is just one part of it. So in what she was trying to put across, Red Cross does not do cooking anymore, but our vendors do. And so the management class just talks about how you put all those pieces together. So yeah, it's really important.
And to add to that, the kitchen management class is about working with those kitchen vendors that are doing the
right
cooking. We still have a role in that kitchen. We're just not cooking the food. We're cleaning the cameras. We're helping load the cameras. We're telling them the needs that we have and supporting them, but we're not cooking.
Yeah, it's really kind of a mini city is what I look at it as.
Yes, it is. I love working in the Baptist kitchens.
I know.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the insight. And I see a hand up earlier. Now I no longer see it. I think it was Thornton, but I'm not sure. Okay, so another question is for recommendations. I'm going backwards. That does the panel have any recommendations for what kind of food thermometers to bring with you for the disaster, whether it's manual or electric?
Well, I would not do an electric one because you don't always know if you have power. But
No.
I always recommend in your go bag that you bring your own gloves and your own hair nets or hat and your own thermometer. That's just me, but you may not have what you need at that time. So I always make sure that I've got it with me just in case.
And I use both, Vicki, because, if when we're not talking electric as in plug-in, we're talking battery operated, I assume, a digital. Digitals are great, but they have to have full batteries. They have to have good batteries. So I keep both, actually, a manual, a regular one, and a digital one. They're only about $9, $12 a piece. So I keep both in my go bag.
And if you're using herbs, they're always supposed to have at least one or two in the herb itself. And it's always good to make sure that you are having those herb drivers take pictures of the meals and temp them when they pick them up, and if they have a long travel, to temp them before they start serving.
Thank you so much. And Dan, your hand is up. Would you like to come off mute?
Yes, I just had, this is Dan from out here at the Guam chapter. And we had a lot of things went on naturally when we had the recovery operations a few months ago. Just a couple of quick questions. I realized that, okay, we no longer do the cooking and stuff, but at the initial stage, we do have emergency C rations that we have resources to grab that we do issue. And
Sometimes
these are
that's
just,
not the only way you can start out, honestly, especially where you're at.
yeah. And then the second thing I was going to ask was, and one of our other volunteers asked it, was that on these thermometers, we did some research and we looked, and there's quite a few resources you can get these thermometers from. So we were wondering, is there a standard recommended type of food thermometer, and is the Red Cross going to be issuing those?
There's a standard one that we purchase for all the herbs, but I can't tell you the exact name. Just make sure it's not a meat thermometer and that it's calibrated regularly to make sure that it is functioning properly.
Okay. All right, thank you.
I buy mine from Amazon.
Sometimes
you.
sometimes Amazon won't ship to Guam. We have to have it shipped to Hawaii and then they send it here.
Oh my goodness.
This is Glenn coming out. Thank you for the update.
Okay, thank you. And let's go to the next question. Is there a checklist for the kitchen or feeding go backs?
There really isn't, but I'm sure Mary and I could put one together for you and have it on one of the next sessions. We'll put it in the chat.
Okay, thank you so much. And we have a comment in the chat that we really love the Dr. Seuss quote. Okay, next question that I'm seeing.
But like I said, when you're feeding, they look forward to you coming, and they don't complain. They just want to see you, and they're glad you're there. So food is always a comfort thing in a disaster, and that gives them that heart to know that we're there and we still care.
I'm sorry, Iwe. I wanted to mention too that there are two types of P cards. There is one that has just, I think last year, started being issued from National, and it is only to be used on DRs. And then there's the P card that is issued by your territory or your region. So again, if you're lucky enough to get one of those ones from National, that really helps because you don't have to distinguish between, whether it was on the DR or not on the DR. So if you are going out as a feeding either supervisor, manager, or lead, then you should definitely get one of those cards from National.
I thought they only hand chose who got to have those cards.
I think you can request. I mean, okay. Yeah. So again, you can request. They might turn you down, but again, it's always nice to have.
Okay, I'm not seeing too much questions in the chat. Does anyone wants to come off mute to ask any questions?
No, I just like to talk to Dennis. Yes, you can use this presentation and we can backfill or help you or work on teams with you to help your team.
There was a question. Thanks, Julia. There was a question earlier about cutting wraps and fruit, not hot food, considered food preparation that requires special permission, or can any shelter staff do it as needed?
Here's the thing. If they're a shelter person, they probably don't have basic food safety. We're trying to require it in our division that shelter, because it's not a requirement for shelter workers anymore, but all feeding people should have basic food safety. So they can cut wraps, they can cut muffins in half and wrap them. They just have to be served separately, and they have to be done with gloved hands and hatted or hair netted heads.
Thank you. And we have a question. I saw that now backing up that what is the accept approve of certification for kosher, etc. meals that we're requiring from the vendor? We're not asking the clients to prove they're kosher or they want special meals, but we're asking the vendor to provide a certificate. And what
Yeah.
certificate are we looking for?
Yeah, I re-answered that one. Actually, we can accept a menu from them that shows that they actually serve those meals so that they kind of know what they're doing. But really, there's not that I know of. Mary, you might know more, but I don't think there's any certification
No, there
that
isn't.
vendors have.
No, but as you said last week, the best thing to do when you have that situation is go to the local religious leader.
Yeah.
And again, that should happen in Blue Skies. That should happen now. We have the two different types of events. We have known events like hurricanes and tornadoes that are coming, and we have the unknown like wildfires that pop up. So, or earthquakes. So, do it now. Go to the temple and ask the rabbi, what vendors, what stores, what restaurants can we use when we have people who are in our shelters that request kosher meals? They're the experts in the area. I'm not. So I always go to the religious leaders
Right.
and find out.
And just as an FYI, a lot of the heater meals, as they're called, not the MREs and all those others, they have kosher meals and they also have low sodium meals in them. You just have to get approval to be able to purchase heater meals.
Yeah, they have quite a few of the different meals in those heater meals.
Yes. Can I answer the question about what's the difference between an agreement form and an MOU?
Sure.
We don't do MOUs with feeding. We do feeding agreements because they can change by the disaster or change by the situation. We do feeding agreements because it's a temporary situation, except for our national vendors that we work with through our national corporation.
So what I'm hearing is that we're using the feeding supplier agreement for our local vendors, and we're going to use MOUs. MOUs is established from our national partners at the national headquarters. It's not for local restaurants, correct?
So the only ones that would use the MOUs are the ones we already have as national vendors. So that would be like Cracker Barrel, Firehouse Subs, the Baptist Kitchen's a whole nother story. But any of the others, anybody else we have, no matter what the disaster, it's a vendor agreement form. We don't do MOUs for feeding.
Thank you. And I think another question can also be answered on the similar part, is the vendor agreement form a binding contract? And I'm showing this slide that here it says include this non-binding disaster feeding supplier letter. So the agreement is non-binding.
It's just a general shaking hands agreement. This is what we want from you, and you're willing to give this to us. And we hope that that makes it work for both sides.
Okay, thank you. And we have a question. Is the restaurant survey power app still being used?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Is the restaurant survey power app still being used?
I can't answer that because I don't use it. Sorry.
I don't know what it is. We're using a a vendor capacity form, but I didn't know we had an app.
I've never heard of an app either.
Me either. Probably Larry can put some comments, context in the chat. Okay, next question that we have is, how much does Salvation Army usually charge us for the meals?
It depends on the region that you're in because it depends on the economic status of that community. So that's something you're going to make in this vendor agreement. It'll go by anybody will make those decisions by whatever state, county, or area that you're in.
Okay, thank you.
Food
Anyway, we
costs
have-
vary across our region quite a bit.
We have two hands raised, Al and Dan. Can you see those, Iwe?
Yes, Al, do you
Okay.
want to come off mute?
Sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
So, some of the information, I'm just making a comment. Some of the information like the 4x4x4, wearing gloves, running the shelters out here where I'm at in Cali, I find it, we're very, interesting folks. So it's not that training's an issue, like for instance, the glove practices, changing your gloves, that some people feel are common sense. I think you almost have to, when a shelter stands up for the first time, I think we have to have like a mini pre-training for food people or for the shelter itself, because it's again, it's not that they haven't had the training that address these topics of safe food handling and keeping, but I can tell you, every single shelter I went to, they didn't know how to just get rid of the old stuff. And they also didn't know anything about the 4x4x4s. The glove handling, you kind of have to chase your volunteers around, make sure to change their gloves for picking things up. And I'm just being totally honest. It's a repetitive thing. And I just feel if we could somehow have like a mini training centered around the food safety practices and the 4x4x4, a real short and sweet one when the shelter stands up. Because it doesn't do no good. We load ourselves down with all these trainings that are great information, but quite frankly, a lot of that information doesn't
Right.
when you're standing things up. So that's my only thing. There's certain things that have to be refreshed at the time.
Yeah,
Is
Al,
my, you know,
thank you.
uh,
All of us are applauding you, so thank you very much. We do need to do that. I also would like to say that if you ever see that, you need to go to your supervisor. And if your supervisor isn't, paying a whole lot of attention, then you need to go up to the lead or the manager, because it's so easy to make people ill. And these are people who have gone through so much already. The last thing that any of us want to do is make them ill on top of it. I think I am finding that the sheltering folks are extremely open. Used to be we were very siloed groups. I don't believe we are anymore. And we're doing a whole lot of cross training. And so that's going to help some of that. But I do agree with you. There should immediately be something that is done in the shelters around food safety. We want to get that out there.
And let me make one more quick comment because we're almost to our time. You know, when you onboard a new feeding person, which I did many times, even though I wasn't there, I was doing it distance, via distance last fire season. It's the perfect time to review a couple of those things. You know, every Red Cross volunteer should have some kind of orientation to their assignment when they get there, and that would be perfect time to do that, Al.
Thank you all for your comments. We have one more
Go on.
minute.
Away?
Yes.
Yeah, hi. This is David Tuckman. I put an FYIMP cards in the comments. I'm actually driving now, so I can't read it.
No
Yaway,
problem.
could you please read it for
David,
me?
David, may I follow up with you offline?
Of course.
I like to take one more question.
Sure.
Thank you, David. We have another question, then we'll conclude. So for Salvation Army, do we need to have a local MOU or do we establish a vendor agreement based on the national MOU?
A vendor agreement for each individual Salvation Army because they all run a little bit differently.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to conclude this, and with that, next week we're going to talk about how to work in a field kitchen. Those are our field partner kitchens, and we'll talk about that. And thank you so much for joining us. If we missed any questions, we'll be reaching out to you individually. Thank you all. Have a great night.
And John, I saw you had your hand up, so if you type your question in the chat, I will make sure we get to it.